all distinguished guests. My name is Kanchana Setanan, a program chair of the PAEE ALE 2020 conference. Today, I have the honor of introducing our first keynote speaker, Honorable Abhisit Vejjajiva. Honorable Abhisit Vejjajiva was the 27th Prime Minister of Thailand, holding the post from December 2008 to August 2011. He was first elected to Parliament in 1992 and has been re-elected 8 times. Over 2.5 decades, he has assumed many responsibilities, especially the chairman of the House Committee for Education. Honorable Abhisit Vejjajiva was born in the United Kingdom in 1964. After completing his primary education in Thailand, he returned to the United Kingdom to study at Eton College. He later graduated with a bachelor degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, with the first-class honor from Oxford University, where he also earned a master's degree in economics. Before entering the politics, he taught at the Chulachomkao Royal Military Academy from 1987 to 1988, and at the Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University from 1990 to 1991. On the final note, Honorable Abhisit Vejjajiva is a fascinating individual, and we are grateful for his presence among us today. Today, he will deliver a speech in the topic of Future, We Hear You, Reforming Education for Lifelong Learning. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Honorable Abhisit Vejjajiva.
President of the Asian Institute of Technology, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Like the President, when I was asked to participate at this conference last year, I thought that I would be with all of you who are in this room and also joining us online at the beach resort of Pattaya. But as we all know, so much has happened since, and I am pleased to be here, and I commend the organizers of the conference that they can go through with this conference at a very challenging time. Indeed, the topic and the conference itself highlights the importance that we all attach to the process of education. Even as I speak today, with the whole world engulfed by the global pandemic, so many headlines around the world are actually about education. There were a lot of debates about the importance of opening schools, balancing this very need of the valuable education in developing the next generation of humans against the health risks. There continues to be so much debate about what is the appropriate way of providing or delivering education under current circumstances. The President himself mentioned that so many organizations are now going for the hybrid model. And there are also a number of other, perhaps, controversies around the world concerning education, the wearing of face masks in school, and interestingly, for instance, in the UK, where artificial intelligence was used to try to work out what grades students should get in their university admission system, which has caused also a lot of debate and controversy. So there's no shortage of challenges that we face today after we have met with the global pandemic. But the fact of the matter is, we have also to realize that even before the pandemic, I think the education system was also being questioned. The way that we have been delivering education for so many decades, or maybe even centuries, are called more and more to question whether they are providing the right preparations for the next generation as they grow up and as they participate in our economic system and society. And we have to recognize also that even before the global pandemic, we have already talked about this age being the age of disruption, driven by technological changes at unprecedented pace, disruptive effects, not just in terms of finding new ways of doing things, but forcing the reorganizations almost in every sector. The government sector, the private sector, and of course, even if we take a look at ourselves, we will find how technology has transformed our own behavior in everyday life over the last few decades. All this suggested that education as a system was being tested anyway. And that is why we are now talking about the need to find innovative ways or to change our ways of delivering education. The topic I've been given has the word reforming education in it. For those in Thailand, my fear is that you will all be rather tired of the word reform, because you've heard it all too often and perhaps noticed that very little has changed despite many efforts of reform in the past. But reform we must proceed with to meet the challenges of tomorrow. But before I move on to that very topic, let me, I suppose, say at the outset that maybe I'm in the minority here. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an education specialist. But I hope that my thoughts accumulated through 30 years of public service might offer some insights as to what I think is needed from the education system. And before I talk about the changes that are necessary, I think we also need to look back to take stock of what we have developed. And of course, my experience is very much influenced by what has been happening here in Thailand, although I'm quite confident that what I will have to say will also resonate with many other countries, particularly emerging economies and developing countries. Let me start by saying that over a number of decades, one of the successes that we have had in education has been the expansion of opportunities. That has clearly been the priority for so many governments, certainly successive governments here in Thailand, where we've managed to increase the year of schooling of our people tremendously. We have moved from a situation where there was only 6 years of compulsory education, and we have expanded now to provide free education for 12 to 15 years. The numbers reflect that the proportion of the population, at least for the younger generations, being enrolled in school is as high as many hope that it could be. And also in Thailand, there has never been a real problem of discrimination as far as gender is concerned as well. Indeed, girls have been able to obtain and have access to education. But it's through that drive towards the expansion of opportunities that I think some of the problems have also accumulated. We talk about expansion of opportunities here in Thailand, where children are required by law to have at least 9 years schooling. And as I said, free provision is available for 12 to 15 years. But one of the numbers that is still quite shocking is that the rate of dropouts continues to be quite high. even if we enroll 100% of kids into primary school, only about just over 50% will complete the last year of secondary school. To me, that suggests that the education system is failing to accommodate the diversity of needs. Sure, there are dropouts, maybe because there is a problem of migration of the family and so on. But there are also clearly problems for a number of children who simply cannot fit in to the education system. That's, I think, lesson number one. That as we drove mass education in the past, we often forget that education needs to be diverse, needs to tailor to individual needs. And failing that, we will be leaving people out of the education system or not allowing them to actually benefit from the education system. Secondly, with the drive towards the expansion of opportunities, there has been also costs in terms of quality. Here in Thailand in particular, we are still very much disappointed by the PISA scores of children in key subjects. And there is clearly a glaring gap between the leading schools in the country and so many schools in remote areas where the chances of entering into a strong, academically strong university is still very much limited. This gap, which also reflects other dimensions of inequality suffered by so many countries at the moment, also, I think, should give us pause for thought about, again, the need to be able to bring everybody along to benefit from the education system. With the expansion of opportunities, higher education is also directly affected because in the old days, shall we say, higher education was actually very much education for the elites. The cream, if you like. But once higher education became mass education, the value provided by having that piece of paper that you call degrees is not what it was. And it's become compounded now in the last couple of decades, where there has clearly been a mismatch between what the education system is supplying and the demands of the private sector or even the public sector for human resources. I go up and down the country, I see so many complaints from parents who thought that they sent their kids, their children to university, get a degree, and yet could not find the right jobs. At the same time, I meet so many entrepreneurs, so many companies that complain that they cannot find the kind of people that they would like to employ. So with the expansion of mass education, somewhere along the way, we have had problems facing us in terms of the lack of diversity, in terms of quality, in terms of mismatch. And in many ways, the education system became somewhat removed from the rest of society. There simply was not enough interaction between those people who are actually going to be employing the people that education provides. And in many ways, that system wasn't so bad when we were living in the age of early industrialization, where the emphasis, I guess, was on creating employment opportunities for mass production. But as we have entered, in a way, post-industrial age, with many aspects of post-modernism, if you like, this will no longer serve. That is why when we talk about the need for education reform for lifelong learning, we now need to take stock of where we are in terms of what we want the education system to do. It's no longer the case that you can learn in classrooms to have whatever knowledge or skills, and that will be applicable once you enter industry or employment or even the public sector. The demands for competencies, which I think will be the key of this conference, the demand for specific skills are not being met. And that clearly is the biggest challenge and objective of the system. Now, before I run through what I see as the key changes that we need to put in, I go back to the basics, actually, of education. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the root of the word education, but supposedly it comes from Latin. The word in Latin is educare, but it had two meanings. One meaning, which I think is more straightforward, is it means to train, to mold, to rise up. So education is seen as a process of training, of molding people, of letting people grow in terms of knowledge. But the other meaning, I think, is much more interesting. The root of the word educare means to lead out. And for me, if we can make education this second meaning, which is the drawing out of people's abilities, talents, and skills, we'll be heading in the right direction. One of the criticisms of an education system like Thailand's, and actually in so many other countries in the region, and maybe among many developing countries as well, is that education hasn't been about bringing out things from people. It has always been cramming things in. From an early age, you get crammed with all the knowledge and information and so much, which actually you find not so useful in later life, even as soon as you leave university and enter the workforce. And with that process of cramming in, of making everything, I guess, like mass production, that is why the system has been failing to meet the needs of today and tomorrow. And so we need to start again. And we need to recognize how the world has changed. In the old days, certainly people in my generation, if you didn't get any education, you would be ignorant. Ignorant in the sense that you wouldn't have the knowledge because you couldn't get any knowledge unless you had the books or you knew people who knew what you wanted to learn. But today, mobile phones, hi-fi, Wi-Fi, the internet, is enough for almost anybody to find information that they are interested in. So education shouldn't and couldn't really be about cramming in more information anymore, because everybody can do that for themselves. Education now has to start at an early age, teaching people the skill of learning rather than the substance of learning. And the skill of learning, and then the need to be able to synthesize, criticize, analyze, and so on. So even before higher education, you really need to change the way education is organized. As children grow up, maybe right into secondary school, it's also the case that in the old days, children would be asked, What will you do when you grow up? And there was, in the old days, I guess, a single answer. I want to be an engineer, I want to be a policeman, I want to be whatever. Well, I'm not sure that that question makes sense for today's children or the children of the future. They don't see a life in a single career. They may not have any aspiration of belonging to any kind of organization at all, but rather they see themselves multitasking, being independent entrepreneurs, trying things out, and certainly many of them would not have this idea that they're committed to a single career for 20, 30, 40 years. So many of them want to succeed before they're 30. And if they do, they want to move on. If they don't, they want to try something else. So the demands, the preparations that they want from an education system has got to be different from the way we've organized education in the past. For children who are maybe 13, 14, 15, I think what they need to know is they want to self-discover what they're good at, what are their aspirations, and what kind of skills that they want to attain in education. And it cannot be organized in the same old ways. For instance, here in Thailand, like in many countries, as you enter maybe the second half of your secondary education, you're often asked to choose between the arts and the sciences. I'm not sure that makes sense anymore. Value creation in the economy today is all about creativity being added on to technology. If you're really good at sciences without creativity, you won't be able to create value. If you have creativity but you cannot handle technology, you'll find it tough. And as I said, if the aspirations of young people are going to be independent entrepreneurs, well, they'll need to have quite a diverse set of skills, customized to their own needs. So it cannot be mass production education anymore. It has to be customized. And which that means that you need to redesign the curriculum, even right from primary and secondary school, and you will probably have to redesign your admission system into universities or even vocational schools. Because now you will have people who want to do their own thing with a different mix of what kind of subjects or interests that will carry them forward. And so you have to accommodate to that. Once you get to higher education, barring a number of professions where there may be specific and specialized skills that you need to have the training, it's likely that people would be better served in a multidisciplinary kind of education. Just imagine somebody who is going out to become an independent entrepreneur, operating their own business, doing something in the gig economy and so on. Well, they might need to know a lot about business, they might need to know about engineering, they might need to know a bit about accountancy, law, and so on. And so the trend in the previous century, where education actually got more and more specialized, might need to be reversed. And people will find value in seeing the connections between the various disciplines and subjects, which will serve them well as they go on to their own future. As far as the mismatch problem that I've mentioned, again, that suggests that the curriculum will need to be updated all the time, that there has to be a great deal of flexibility in the way education institutions organize themselves. And all this will not be possible if the education institutions are constrained by a centralized, controlling ministry or whatever government organization that is in charge of education. There is need to deregulate, there is need to decentralize, and there is need to open up the education space for other stakeholders in society. So many universities and institutes and institutions can benefit from allowing contributions from the private sector. I don't just mean financial contributions, I mean contributions towards what kind of curriculum, what kind of skill set, what kind of competencies they are expecting education institutions to provide prospective employees or prospective partners in the future. These are all serious challenges, and it's going to be with us so long as technology drives an incredible pace of change in our lives and in our societies. We need to face up to it, and I know maybe as recent as last year, a lot of people talk about disruption, but so many will still have not been faced with a situation where they actually had to deal with it. We should thank COVID-19 that it has made the word disruption concrete for so many people, woken so many of us up for the need to be flexible, to be nimble, to change, and to find innovative ways of solving problems. I hope that at least the way many of us have dealt with the pandemic will also teach us that there are also going to be other disruptive factors down the line. And we need to have the necessary skills to overcome this, to overcome these challenges and design a better future for all of us. So for all of you who are educators, I hope that you will recognize now the need for serious reforms. Forget about structures at the national level. Forget about the details of so many reforms in the past. Let's focus on this learning process. Let's focus on equipping the future, our future, with the right set of competencies and skills so that they will make valuable contributions to the economy, to society, and to the world at large. Thank you very much. I believe we have a question and answer.
Okay, let me start. I don't know it is a question or not, but for myself, I would like to know if we want to reform the education, maybe, in our country, who are the most influent to reform our education?
Well, my own belief on how successful reforms work is that maybe you need the push and pull from different directions at the same time. You certainly need leadership at the very top or top down that sends a clear signal that change is needed. But any successful or lasting reform can only happen if the direct stakeholders buy in to these reforms. So while I say there is need for top-down leadership, there is need to decentralize and deregulate, which I've said before, to allow the stakeholders, the direct stakeholders, to actually brainstorm, to actually reflect their needs and put their heads together about what possibilities and innovations could be the answer to the challenges. So you need, I think, at least two of these factors that will be able to influence the reform process.
Okay, thank you. And Any more questions? Professor Atakon, you want to share something? Please.
Hello. My question is, if we have to assess educational system in Thailand to be able to benchmark with the world-leading countries, how do you suggest that the way we benchmark ourselves is in the right direction, or in what direction that you think it would be better?
I think it's probably going to be a mistake if we try to make some kind of single assessment, because I think the objectives and the purposes of education is quite diverse. And you may look into specific areas. There are areas where comparisons may be easy. For instance, in the case of research, because I think there's an accepted global standard of the quality and maybe the quantity of research that is being undertaken. In terms of, say, the attainments of students, you should look at the situation as far as employment is concerned, and not just the number being employed, but whether those skills and knowledge that they attain from their education system fit in with or are actually directly useful for the people, the students, and also their employers or their organizations. You should look at also the kind of social services and values being provided by education institutions. So I think it's diverse, and it's probably a mistake if we try to come up with a single assessment and benchmark. But I think there are specific areas where you feel are basically the objectives or the purposes of education, where you could make very meaningful comparisons and therefore discover how strong or how weak you are, and therefore address the problems and challenges that are relevant to you.
Okay, thank you. We have, our participants from the online format as well. And Louis, you want to share something about, this, topic?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I am really enjoying the conference until now. I am really sorry for not being at Thailand at the moment, but it is great to participate from a distance point of view. You presented a speech that enlarged our view about education, not only about engineering education, but as education as a whole. We are facing a lot of difficulties at the present moment with COVID-19 and with the operationalization of the classes. Teachers all around the world are struggling with these new approaches, and also students, of course, from kindergarten to higher education. Would you have some specific message that you could share with the teachers from all around the world, from your perspective in Thailand at the moment? Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, certainly I have great admiration for the teaching profession, and I can understand the unprecedented challenges that you're facing now in terms of trying to organize the learning process under these very difficult circumstances. If I have an added message, it would be this. Actually, before I came into the auditorium, we had a very good conversation about the need to assess the success of virtual learning against on-site or people being physically present. Because I think we need to have that insight about the learning process of people. the agreement seems to have been that at maybe at graduate level or postgraduate level, it wouldn't be too difficult. But I certainly hear here in Thailand that primary school, secondary school, and even lecturers at undergraduate level are having a bit of a nightmare trying to use the technology for education. So in a way, I think the message is we will have to learn about the potential and also the limitations. And I was glad that when the president gave his introductory address, he was saying that, well, we're going to have to use technology to enhance and not replace. Because the old form of learning doesn't need to be thrown away or got rid of. And indeed, I would add another message, which I think is important as well, and it's one of the key objectives of providing an education. And that is one of the skills that will be very valuable in the future is social skill and the human touch. After all, the only advantage we human beings will have maybe over robots and artificial intelligence might be social skills and this human touch. And that's something that we have taken for granted in the old days because the process of coming to school and learning together, we thought provided that socializing environment and skill for students. It may no longer be the case. We already see just from anecdotal observation that more and more people retreat to their own screens. And my argument, certainly as far as reform is concerned, that maybe at kindergarten and also primary school, maybe one of the emphasis would now need to be the need to instill social skills and interpersonal skills, because that's something that's going to be much, much more valuable and maybe even harder to find in the future.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from the online have any questions? Any more questions?
Yes.
Okay, please, Diana, please.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for your speech. It was really inspiring. And I was wondering and reflecting on so many things. But I choose one specific topic that you mentioned about customizing the learning as an experience. And I think that is really interesting considering the context that we have been talking about, this new demanding competences and experiences for students and also for teachers and managers as well. So I would like, if it's possible, to develop a little bit this idea, how we can customize the learning experiences, taking into consideration the diversity that we have in terms of personalities, in terms of roles that we are developing in the organization. So what thoughts about it? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the key to maybe providing this customized education that I mentioned is to really get away from the current maybe perception of what a classroom is, especially as I said in many developing countries where the classroom is still seen as having children or students coming in to listen to the teacher, to the instructor or lecturer, noting things down. And also in many countries, and just memorize that and rewrite that in exam papers. So that has got to be that has got to be changed. And I think there are certainly many technological and other mechanisms that will help, certainly at getting children and students to first of all discover themselves. just looking at the way young people use the internet, there's no shortage of surveys that they answer to try to discover what kind of characters and what kind of future or potential occupations that they should engage in. So you make use of that. So they begin to know what they think they can be or want to be. And then I guess it's the case of removing all the rigidity in the curriculum. So you allow for a kind of mixture according to your interests. Just from my own personal experience, I was educated in the UK, where in the second half of your secondary education at the time, you only needed to do 3 subjects for A levels. I think these days kids probably need to do 4 or 5. But in the old days, it was 3 subjects. And I remember that when I chose my 3 subjects, I was seen as being very odd. I don't think there has been many people who did the combination of the 3 subjects I chose for my A levels. 1 was mathematics, 2 was Latin, and 3 was economics. And it just, so many people were surprised, and they couldn't really understand, because most people who did maths also did physics or the sciences. People who did economics would do economics with history or whatever, and very few people did Latin anyway. But that was what I wanted to learn. I had always enjoyed mathematics as a form of thinking. I was fascinated by the Latin language in the sense that because it's a dead language, it's a question of structuring thoughts into logical forms rather than actually using it for conversation or whatever. And I wanted to study the real world in terms of the economics, which I felt was always going to be a dominating issue, because I had already wanted to go into politics as a career. But very few people did that, and a lot of people find it tough to pick and choose in this way. You will also have noticed that when I attended Oxford University, I also chose philosophy, politics, and economics. And most of the people, the students, after 2 years, after 1 year, would drop maybe philosophy mostly from the 3. I decided to carry on with all the 3 because I just enjoyed the connections between the disciplines. So I think that there needs to be more of that. And as I said, even now with the ambitions or aspirations of people of wanting to become independent operators of some kind, they will need much, much more than a narrow set of specialized skills in one field. So you need to remove that. It's a lot and tough work for teachers. I recognize that. But then you have to really open up your minds and recognize that this is the world that we live in, where diversity and the need to customize has become the rule.
Very interesting. Yeah, I have the questions from the online. The question is how to elevate the technicalities of education in US and UK top universities, also heavily focus on advanced science rather than competence.
I'm not sure I get the drift of the question correctly, but I guess the question is about attaining the kind of standards in education, technical.
Let me say that again, okay? How to elevate the technicalities of education in US and UK top universities, also heavily focus on advanced science rather than competence.
Okay, well, I'll say this. Do you know the these days everybody's rather obsessed with rankings, and there's a number of rankings in education. What interests me is that universities that are often ranked high based on their reputation, and the universities that are ranked high based on current achievements, and the universities that are seen to be successful in the eye of people who then take on or employ their graduates. I'm not sure the rankings would be the same. So that's suggesting, as I said, that actually the key now is for individual institution to also discover what their positioning or their strength should be. You don't need to all compete to become the top research university. You don't need to try to top the ranking by just looking at their indicators and then try to organize according to those factors that are used to calculate the rankings. But you have to, I guess, have a clear identity and purpose of your institute, what your strength is. If it be, strong, advanced technicalities, be it. If it's be about providing certain set of skills and competencies to directly feed into maybe a particular sector in the economy, then so be it. There's no need to compete on the same thing or under the same field. And I think that would serve the system as a whole better than if all institutions try to compete to do the same thing. And certainly one of the problems that we have in Thailand is precisely that all universities appear to want to compete with each other on the same thing, rather than discovering that they have their own strengths or positions that they can enhance to serve the system as a whole, to serve the country as a whole.
Okay, I have something to share with you at the Faculty of Engineering, Prince of Songkhla University. Now we are working on the establishment of a new program. We emphasize more on building up the skills and competencies of the students. But when we talk about this with the parents of the young kids, like for example, the parents of the secondary, the high school kids, the parents focus on the other way, like I'm talking about the academic strength. Like you still see, and I think all of us will see that our kids still go to the cram school until 8 or 9 at night. It seems like the message that we are talking here in higher education, you were talking about the social skills, and also in our new program, we focus more on the communication skills. This message doesn't, I think it seems like it doesn't pass on to the parents of those kids. So from your experience or your perspective, would you give us the suggestion how to, I think I'm thinking about the reform of the education, but we just don't know where to start.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I decided that my speech would not be confined to the issue of higher education, because I recognize full well that there's a linkage between all stages of education. And for a successful reform of higher education, you also need to reform the basic education system. And also, I mentioned before, the admission system. Because at the moment, I'm not surprised that the parents in particular are still very much obsessed with the old system, because our assessment and admission system forced students and parents to stay within that frame. And one of the things that I think will soon change, I may be wrong about this, is that in the past and also at present, this obsession with obtaining a degree, all right, whether that's going to be find employment for you is almost irrelevant. This obsession of getting a degree is still the most important thing for so many people. What I think may change that is more and more you will find, number one, that even leading companies will probably attach less and less importance to whether you have a degree and from where. Already, I think so many companies rather have their own tests of skills and competencies in their decision to hire people. And if that becomes more and more the trend, it will filter through that this focus or obsession with just having a degree is not going to be something that even parents or students will desire anymore. Secondly, I think more and more parents will see examples of successful people in the younger generations who have maybe had a successful startup, maybe engaged in social enterprise, and discover that those people didn't succeed through the traditional training or ways of education. I think it's this kind of reflection back onto people at large that will change the attitude of parents and students of the future. So for instance, actually, one of the problems I talked about was mismatch when I talked to the private sector. And I always complained to them because they said that often they discovered that they'd rather have somebody from vocational schools than getting a degree and cannot work with them. So I say to them, well, if that's really the case, why do you still pay people with university degrees more? You have to provide incentives for what you want. And actually, these days, I'm beginning to hear some people who actually graduated with a university degree now having to go back to vocational school because they discover that that might actually prepare them better for what they can or want to do in their working life. And so if you're not careful, you just get trapped in that frame all the time. One of the things I still do, which confirms that I'm old, which is every morning I still look at the newspaper in paper form. Why do I do that? I hope I will just see and stumble on something that I wouldn't otherwise read or deliberately seek for. So it keeps me more open-minded. It widens my interest still, because when you do it online, you don't tend to stumble on things that you're not really interested in because you get all these feeds that basically reinforce the same things. So that's the kind of thing that we should be encouraging people to train themselves to do. It's like every now and then you go into a bookshop and something will strike you and say, hey, that looks interesting. But if you're just searching for books online, you would never stumble upon that book. It would never catch your eye. So somehow you need to enhance any kind of habit or experience that allows for more open-mindedness, more diversity, and providing platforms and forums where people who are not like-minded can actually engage with each other. That would help to balance what I think are the very strong and polarizing trends that social media is forcing upon us.
Thank you. Well, due to the limited of time, I would like to end this session. And finally, I would like to invite President Eden Wu to present, our speaker with a token of our appreciation. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take 5 minutes for the break, okay? And then we will come back to the next session. Thank you. Yes.